So you're originally from is it pronounced Vidor or is it Vidor area?
Vitor.
Vidor. And that's just outside of Beaumont, which,
And
of
I'm about
course,
12 miles from Beaumont.
okay, yeah, like southeast. Well, it's east of Beaumont, but it's southeast, extreme southeast Texas.
Yes, it is.
So, what was it like growing up in your family? Like, not just musically, but just overall.
Man, I'm so fortunate. I had mom and dad that were so supportive. Uh, they've been together all my life. Just really had great role models, and got me started in music when I was really young. So I'm just grateful, blessed to be in part of this family.
So, yeah, that's a big blessing for your folks to stay together. I was very blessed the same way, so I know how that is. And
Yeah, it's very rare these days.
absolutely, yeah, it really is. Takes a lot of sacrifice for real.
Yeah.
You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah.
And you don't realize that until you're an adult, like how much your folks sacrifice, not just for each other, but for you as well. You know?
It's true.
Yeah. So you get your first guitar at 6. So I've seen this story in other interviews and on your biography, and so I'm not going to ask you about that story, but I want to know, as a 6-year-old, is this something you kind of wanted already, or just everything started with the appearance of the guitar?
No, my dad had a guitar. He played, and he kept a guitar under his bed. Um, and he taught me a couple of chords on it. So my dad was an engineer for the railroad, so he was gone for a couple of days at a time. So I guess he got tired of me sneaking into his room and stealing his guitar. But yeah, Santa ended up bringing me one for Christmas
So the
when I was 6.
curiosity was already there.
Oh yeah, yeah, it was already there. He had taught me a couple chords, and I had a at the time I had a Woody Woodpecker record player, so I had a handful of records, and I would just listen to them and try to figure out what they were playing.
A Woody Woodpecker record player. Let's go.
Yeah, so uh, I had a Gene Watson 45. I had an Elvis album
Wow.
and Don Williams.
There you go. Wow, that's a trifecta.
Yeah,
So, are those your influences right away, or like where are you shining as a 6-year-old with music?
with a 6-year-old, I'm all over the place. Of course, my dad was a country music fan, so anytime I'm in the vehicle with him, it's on a country radio station. So hence the Gene Watson,
Yeah.
Don Williams, and my mom was more into to pop and rock, and so I heard a little bit of everything.
So, what are some lessons that you've learned from individually your mom and your dad?
Stay humble.
Yeah.
I think they're both humble, and I think it serves them well. And they were great role models because there's a lot of times that you can maybe get a little too big for your britches, and
Absolutely.
I think it's a bad look.
It's a hard business to stay humble in too,
It is. It
especially
is.
with any kind of success. Really, it can go to your head very quickly because there's so much struggle involved in the business too. So
Yeah.
when you do hit on the right note, so to speak, man, it can really, whoo, it can send you the wrong way on the pendulum, so to speak. So that is a really good lesson to learn. How does those influences blend together? You said your mom was more pop and rock, your dad was more into country, and do you feel now as an accomplished adult musician artist that all of those influences from both sides kind of blend together into your own sound now?
You know what? I'd have to say they do. I grew up in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
I'm older, so I grew up in the 80s, and so of course I had dad's big country influence. But when you're preteen or teen growing up, pop radio in the 80s was huge. So you're gonna hear it, and you're gonna be influenced by it in some uh, form or fashion.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sure there's to this day there's Def Leppard songs that I could completely turn into a country song, it'd be great.
Oh, you and me both.
Yeah,
So we grew up in the same era and with a lot of the same kind of influences too, which is really cool to get to talk to
yeah.
you about some of this stuff. '90s country obviously is a big had a big effect on you and myself as well. I
Oh,
was
for sure.
hugely inspired and influenced by people like Daryl Dodd and Ricky Lynn Gregg and Clint Black and Garth. You know that era. That man, there was just so much cool music coming out at that time. Um,
I tell people every time I believe it was probably the best decade of country music. It was probably the most had the biggest bang. I would say would be the '90s.
yeah, I think there was less of a gap between genders at that point too, right? Like there was so
You
many amazing female artists and they
yeah,
weren't held back quite as much as they had been in the past. I think the '90s was really revolutionary for female country artists.
you're right
Just with
about that.
Reba and Winona and Shania Twain and just so many different folks. Um,
Susie Boggess, Catherine
oh,
Mattea. Yeah.
absolutely, yes. Patty Loveless. I mean, we could
Oh,
go on and
oh,
on and on.
Patty
Pam
Loveless.
Tillis. Golly, there's so many. But you're in the Beaumont area, and
Yeah.
so this area is absolutely chock full of the actual artists that we're talking about here. So, as a young artist, just get your guitar at 6. When is it that you finally realize that you are literally in a hotbed for country music?
Um, about the time Mark Chestnut got his record deal. You know, he's from here.
Yep.
He was playing in a little club in town called Cutters, and he hadn't gone on the road yet, but we knew he was about to go on the road. But they had brought Tracy Bird in to take his place at Cutters and to try to groom him. So there for a while, they were both there. Um, I knew Clay. He's from my hometown as well, Clay Walker.
Mm-hmm.
But my dad would bring me to Cutters, and they would let me in as long as he was with me. And it was like going to school for me. So I sit there and watch, and I knew that Chestnut had gotten a record deal, and they were working on one for Tracy. So it didn't seem like such a pipe dream as it may to someone else that wasn't around it, because they made it seem attainable, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that had a huge influence on me. What it didn't seem out of reach.
Right. Yeah, it just makes things seem more attainable when you see people that grew up the same way you did in the same streets you did, and they're
Yeah,
just blowing up all over the place, not just nationally, but globally. We're talking about three, I mean, just giants in the Texas country field, just going big all over the place. And again, just it was Mark Chestnut, Clay Walker, Tracy Bird. Those are the big three, but there was a lot of other artists coming from the Southeast Texas scene at the time. So it's and I hear that sound a lot in what you do as
yeah.
well, especially like with WD-40. That song
Oh yeah,
is definitely stapled in that Southeast Texas sound for sure. I talked to a friend of mine last night on my live broadcast who's a songwriter, and I told him we would be talking today, you and I. And that's the
yeah.
first thing he said. WD-40 and duct tape. I love that song. I was like,
Oh, who
yeah,
was
yeah.
it?
Chris Edwards.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, he's
okay.
from the Nacogdoches area.